It's not just simply being able to bounce back. It's actually being able to bounce back better.
We cannot hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, Colleen, but we cannot hear you. Colleen, we cannot hear you. You cannot hear you. No sound.
Hello, good afternoon.
There it is, yes.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry. Before we begin this webinar, I just want to give you a few house rules. Number one, this meeting is being recorded. Number two, this webcast is being live streamed at the Asian Institute of Management's Facebook page, and a recording will be available to the public after the webcast. Number three, the Zoom recording may be shared to AIM students for educational purposes. Ask questions by typing questions in the chat box. If you're at Zoom, type it in the chat box. If you're on Facebook, type it in the comment section, and we'll be there to answer as much as we can. Next is, please remain on mute throughout the webcast, and the host will invite you to turn on your video during Q&A and for the photo opportunity towards the end of the webcast. And by continuing to be in this meeting, you are acknowledging the above mentioned terms. So let's go through the program a little bit. Next slide. Okay, we'll begin with the welcome message and introduction of speakers. And then we'll have our first speaker who will speak for 15 minutes. And then there will be a moderated Q&A. And then the next one would be best practices in urban disaster risk governance, another speaker. And will be followed by a moderated Q&A. And then a third speaker, followed by a Q&A, and then we'll have 15 minutes for panel discussion and questions. And then let's all wrap it up together in takeaways and closing. So let's begin. Good afternoon and welcome to the AIM Disaster Risk and Crisis Management Knowledge Sharing Series. Today is also the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction and ASEAN Day for Disaster Management. My name is Colin Berberabi Garcia. I am the Assistant Provincial Administrator of Batangas in the Philippines and a graduating student of the AIM Executive Masters in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management. Well, I guess they picked me to host today because, let's face it, Batangas has had more than its fair share of disasters this year. One unsuspecting January, Sunday, just this year, the Taal volcano erupted for the first time in over 50 years. And while we are already in the process of recovery right now, the threat of another major eruption remains. Well, I bet most of you may have forgotten how devastating this was because we now face another crisis, the COVID-19 global pandemic, which is the first one of its kind in over a century. It has evolved from a mere health problem to a global economic and systemic problem. And we have been forced to lock down and implement different preventive measures. But there's one problem with disasters. They do not follow lockdown orders or quarantine measures, and they can strike us anytime without warning. Just recently, there's this massive flooding that affected 27 provinces across central and southern China in July, claiming 219 lives and affecting more than 63 million people, plus the economic damage which exceeded 25 billion US dollars. Meanwhile, in different parts of Indonesia, Thailand, Lao PDR, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Cambodia suffered substantial loss of lives and economic losses due to flash floods, earthquakes, and landslides just in the past few months. What a world we are living in today, right? I guess what really matters now is that a lot more is demanded of us as leaders. That is why we need to practice effective disaster risk governance. Today's program is brought to you by the Asian Institute of Management in partnership with ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management, or most commonly known as AHA Center, United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific, UCLG ASPAC, and Hotel Resilient. We have an international audience. Thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to jump into the discussions via Zoom chat box if you're at Zoom, or on the comment section of the Facebook feed. I'd like to give a personal shout out to our special guests, particularly the governor of the province of Batangas, Governor Dodo Mandanas, and Mrs. Regina Reyes Mandanas, who is also an alum of AIM Masters of Entrepreneurship. A shout out to all of you in the at home or in the office. Thank you again, and let's begin the EMDRCM live series. We will be joined by a very special panel today. Two all the way from Jakarta and one from Germany. They will be introduced to us by our moderator, Professor Marquesa Reyes. Professor Marquesa Catalina Reyes is currently an assistant professor and academic program director of the AIM EMDRCM program, which focuses on equipping leaders with disaster risk leadership and governance toolkits. She has a vast academic and professional background, being the senior technical advisor for DRR and resilience under the Climate Change Commission. She also sat as ASEAN Technical Advisor for Disaster Risk Reduction under UNISDR and ASEAN Secretariat, and her project work includes the first proposal approved by the Green Climate Fund for the Philippines on impact-based forecasting and early warning, the Urban Resilience Program of Oxfam GB and Asian Development Bank, and the ASEAN Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance Program. She also holds a magna cum laude Doctor of Engineering in Urban Planning from the University of Kassel in Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Professor Marquesa Reyes.
Thank you very much, Colin, for opening the webinar and for your nice introduction. Hello and welcome to all our esteemed speakers who are now here, and I'm very happy to see them. And of course, the participants in today's webinar. So we have participants in both platforms here in the Zoom meeting room, as well as on Facebook Live. So I'm so glad to be your moderator this afternoon. And we are all so very lucky to have an amazing and brilliant set of speakers for our panel discussion this afternoon. As mentioned by Colin, this maiden activity is kicking off the Disaster Risk and Crisis Management Knowledge Sharing Series of AIM. Our program, the Executive Master in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management, is in its second year this year. And so I'm very proud to say that we will have our first batch of graduates in December. So a shout out to all our faculty and students out there who are with us right now. So this afternoon's webinar will revolve around the topic of disaster risk governance, in keeping with the theme of the International DRR Day this year, as we also jointly observe the ASEAN Day for Disaster Management. So at this point, allow me to set a context to our discussions. In a world where we currently live in, a lot of things has changed. And not only are we presently dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, but we must also contend with disasters and climate change that have been affecting the way we work and live long before the pandemic struck. Many countries in Asia, like Indonesia, Cambodia, China, Japan, and others, are dealing with the concurrent shocks of the pandemic, flood, drought, and earthquake, as well as handling compounded risks, like in the Philippines, where all these natural hazards take place at the same time while we deal with a possible volcanic eruption. In Batangas, for example, as where Colin hails. In an increasingly VUCA world, a world that is more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, good disaster risk governance remains just as crucial as ever. What does this mean? We now live in a world that's becoming more volatile due to increasing frequency of extreme weather events, for instance, and their worsening impacts on people's livelihoods and activities. And the more volatile, the faster and more risks are generated, the harder it is for countries and communities to cope and adapt. The more uncertain the world becomes due to, for instance, the changing climate, the tougher it is to predict and measure risk. The more complex risk becomes, such as risks that accumulate in cities and urban systems, the more difficult it is to analyze. And the more ambiguous the situation is, for example, when information is incomplete, or even opaque, as in the case of SARS-CoV-2 virus, the harder it is to interpret risk and countervail it. So a good disaster risk governance requires a system of institutions, operational modalities, norms and policies, and legal frameworks to guide, manage, and coordinate implementation of disaster risk management strategies. It also requires engagement, ownership, consultations, and contributions from a wide range of stakeholders. A strong disaster risk governance, therefore, is the foundation for a successful disaster risk and crisis management. The webinar for today aims to surface urgent disaster risk governance challenges that confront various organizations at different scales, from the local to the national to the regional, and different systems, be they government, business and industry, academia, and civil society, in this so-called new normal or new reality. In our new reality, disaster and climate risks have been compounded by the ongoing shock caused by COVID-19, creating these VUCA times. Our discussions will delve into these pressing issues. For instance, cities require innovative approaches to disaster risk governance because of their high density, complex governance structures, and exposure to systemic risks. Many cities are struggling to ensure that decisions and priorities are not only risk-based, but also inclusive. So how about for regional entities such as the AHA Center that also have to be cognizant of transboundary risks across member states with differing vulnerabilities and resilience capacities? And what about the business sector, such as the hotel and resort industry? How can they adapt and thrive in the face of chronic stress due to the pandemic? These are some of the questions that our speakers will deep dive in and shed light on. So at this point, I have the privilege now to introduce our set of speakers for this afternoon to speak on the topic of AHA Center and its role in disaster risk governance in ASEAN is Ms. Adelina Kamal. Ms. Adelina is the Executive Director since August 2017 of the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Management, or AHA Center, located in Jakarta. She reports directly to the AHA Center Governing Board, consisting of the heads of national disaster management organizations of the 10 ASEAN member states, and is responsible for leading the center in operationalizing the ASEAN Declaration on One ASEAN, One Response. The AHA Center, established in 2011, is the operational coordination engine of the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, or ADMER. Ms. Kamal has represented the AHA Center in regional global high-level events, serving as speaker or moderator. She has a master's degree in management from IPMI Business School in Indonesia, an MBA degree from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, and a bachelor's degree in management from Trisakti University in Indonesia. Our second speaker is Dr. Bernadia Irawati Chandradewi. the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific, or UCLG ASPAC, also headquartered in Jakarta. Dr. Bernardia is the first woman Secretary General of the UCLG's regional section. She has been working in urban development and related fields for more than 15 years, and she began her career at the Japan International Cooperation Agency and also joined CITINET in Yokohama. Dr. Bernardia has also been a visiting professor at several universities in Japan and a guest speaker at various international events. In 2015, she was appointed as a member of the advisory group on gender issues of UN Habitat. She was selected as one of the prominent women whose work makes impacts in Asia Pacific in 2018 by Gov Insider Asia. She received her PhD in urban engineering from the University of Tokyo and 2 master's degrees, one in atmospheric physics from Nagoya University in Japan and another in public policy from the National University of Singapore. Dr. Bernardia will share with us her experiences and best practices that she has implemented through the UCLG ASPAC network. And last, but definitely not the least, Dr. Bijan Kazai is the Chief Executive Officer of Hotel Resilient, the world's only scientific benchmarking and independent certification body of hotels and resorts for disaster and climate resilience. In 2016, Dr. Bijan led an international consortium to develop the industry-supported standards as part of the Hotel Resilient Initiative of the Global Initiative on Disaster Risk Management, which eventually gave birth to Hotel Resilient. Dr. Bijan is an expert on catastrophe risk assessment and has more than 20 years of experience in risk modeling and foresight methods in disaster risk management. He has led many international research and consulting projects on behalf of organizations such as the UN, World Bank, and various national government agencies. He holds a master's and a doctoral degree in civil and environmental engineering from the University of California in Berkeley. Dr. Bijan will talk about disaster and climate resilience standards in the hotel and resort industry. So we are in for a treat this afternoon. We are very fortunate to have such high-powered set of speakers for today. So just to let you know that after each presentation, as Colin said, we will give our participants a chance to ask questions. So write your questions in the chat box or on the FB live page of EMDRCM. So without further ado, I would like to call on Adelina to discuss the role of AHA Center in disaster risk governance in the ASEAN region. Adelina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Prof. Marquesa. Good afternoon. Greetings from Jakarta, Indonesia. Again, thank you very much as Asian Institute of Management for inviting the AHA Center to contribute to and participate in this AIM webinar. Actually, this is like the first time for me to participate directly in IM webinar, although that we have engaged the ASEAN Institute of Management before in some of our programs under the AHA Center Executive Program. So thank you again. It is our pleasure to join you all with the students here in commemorating both the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction and the ASEAN Day. As we speak, and you may be aware, there is this tropical storm, Limpha, that has resulted in flooding in central Vietnam. I spoke to some colleagues in Vietnam. Actually, it's not some, it's a good number of people in a conference today where they celebrated the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction in Vietnam. And we were also informed that not only that tropical storm Limpha has landed, but they're also expecting another tropical storm, and that is Nangka, and it's coming. So hopefully things will be all right, but unfortunately, climate change might make this kind of situation more frequent in the foreseeable future. And as a result, ASEAN as a community has no choice but to be better prepared. Okay, perhaps you can go to the next slide. I have Yes. Okay. So this is not the Dulux color chart. It looks like one, but it actually shows the distribution of disaster events in the ASEAN region. As you can see, the blue ones are the hydrometeorological disasters, right? There are other colors there, the geophysical disasters. Now, it is quite interesting. This is actually taken from our recent publication called the ARMOR, the ASEAN Risk Monitor and Disaster Management Review that just came out last August. And based on our publication, it is confirmed that based on the statistics of AHA Center for the past 9 years since AHA Center was established, hydrometeorological hazards have consistently accounted for at least 90% of our annual disasters. And these disasters can be anticipated. They can be predicted. Now, you may have heard from many that our region is projected to become the 4th largest economy in the world by the year 2050, or even faster, 2030. However, as showcased in our publication as well, our region collective capital stock exposed to natural hazards is amounted to 12.17 trillion, or 4 times our combined economy during the same year. So, and it's actually quite bad. Why? Because just imagine that our risk and our collective economy, or GDP, right, it's not balanced. It's like 4 times bigger. So, therefore, if disaster risk reduction efforts and initiative in ASEAN region doesn't improve at the same pace as the economic growth, the ASEAN region's exposure to multi-hazard will undermine our development and our economic growth. We can forget, the projection for ASEAN to become the 4th largest economy in the world. Now, on a more encouraging note, ASEAN perhaps is the only region in the world that has enacted a legally regional binding agreement based on the Hyogo Framework for Action, the predecessor of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. This agreement is known as ADMER, ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response. And this agreement affirms ASEAN countries' commitment to reduce disaster losses and enhance ASEAN collective response to disaster. Signed by the ASEAN foreign ministers in July 2005, just a few months after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. The same agreement also led to the establishment of the AHA Center, the center that I'm leading currently, and also happens to be the home of One ASEAN, One Response. In addition to this regional legally binding agreement, we also have the ASEAN Declaration on One ASEAN, One Response at the bottom, and the ASEAN Vision 2025 on Disaster Management. These two documents are not legally binding, but they're endorsed by either the ministers, the Vision 2025 on Disaster Management, or the leaders, the Declaration on One ASEAN, One Response. The first one that you see on the slide, the Vision 2025 on Disaster Management, has this ambitious goal. That is, by the year 2025, ASEAN shall become the global leader on disaster management because of our experience in the past decades, responding and recovering from disasters. And what we mean by ASEAN here is not AHA Center, it's not ASEAN Secretariat only, it's the ASEAN community, okay? So we have this vision that we want to achieve. And this actually was set in 2015. And we have another 5 years basically to achieve this vision. Now, the other document that is actually quite ambitious is the Declaration on One ASEAN, One Response. And it talks about ASEAN responding as one in the region and outside the region. So far, our focus has been inside the region because we have quite a lot to respond to. But there is also this aspiration by the ASEAN leaders that in the future, ASEAN collectively may also offer our expertise, our experience, and our goodwill to other parts of the world. So ASEAN, in the past, perhaps you can see that we as a region has been the recipient, right, of goodwill, of assistance. But the leaders and our ministers thought that it is time basically to turn the hands, right, from receiving to providing assistance, from receiving to sharing our experience. Okay. Now, AHA Center, therefore, has been established by all the 10 ASEAN countries to serve as the operational engine of the agreement, as well as to serve as the primary ASEAN regional coordinating agency for disaster management and emergency response, tasked to coordinate ASEAN collective response to disasters. In the past 9 years, we have been busy. We have been responding to disasters in the region, more than 30 disasters, as you can see, quite a lot in the Philippines on the right side. Also quite a big number on the left side, that's the Mekong region, and also Indonesia. Malaysia also had a share before. And the recent one was actually in Central Sulawesi in 2018, the recent big one. You may remember that we experienced multiple disasters from Typhoon Mangkut, earthquake in Lombok, triple disaster in Central Sulawesi, flooding in Laos, Myanmar, and other parts of the Mekong region. So we've been quite busy as a region, right, responding to disasters. And out of these disasters, many of them have been recorded as world-class or catastrophic disasters. It's not something that we should be proud of, but this is something that actually we should make use in terms of our experience. Now, next. Perhaps some people think that AHA Center's focus has been only on facilitating response, responding to disasters. But under the ASEAN agreement, we have also been tasked to monitor the risk, to assess the transboundary implication of the risk in the ASEAN countries, to facilitate knowledge sharing, as well as capacity building among the 10 ASEAN countries, and to help ASEAN community to become the global leader on disaster management. So the core functions you can see on the right, the one at the top, very much related to response, preparedness and response, coordination, you know, and then resource management. We have 3 regional stockpile in 3 locations, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand. We have over 322 people in our pool of ASEAN ERAT, ASEAN Emergency Response and Assessment Team. We have regular exercises. We have regional contingency planning. We test them every 2 years in our exercises, and we monitor our report. But the one below, also important, and this is where we think perhaps we can contribute also in terms of improving the disaster risk governance in ASEAN. Now, this chart, again, this is not from Dulux color chart. This is actually showing that ASEAN is exposed to multi-hazard. ASEAN is a $1 trillion hazard, a $1 trillion multi-hazard landscape. We have everything. We are the supermarket of disasters, right? We are the 7-Eleven of disasters. However, this chart also shows that there are countries in ASEAN like Singapore, Brunei, and Malaysia that have higher coping capacities and lower multi-hazard risk exposure and vulnerability, therefore allowing them actually to extend help to other ASEAN countries. Now, we call this surplus of resilience. So it shows opportunity for ASEAN countries, to complement and improve other ASEAN countries that generally rank lower in terms of their coping capacities. But this one was produced last year in our first Armor edition, 2018. In the second one that we just published in August 2019, we focus on the issue of climate emergencies. And then we found out, the scientists said that more frequent, intense, and longer lasting extreme weather events will become the new normal. And no one will be safe in the future. All ASEAN countries, including those with strong coping capacities, will increasingly vulnerable. Okay. So we have regional agreements, we have work programs. Currently, we're actually in the third cycle to implement and operationalize our agreement and to put the agreement into action. We have abundant experience in responding to and recovering from disaster. We have regional stockpiles. We have the ERA team ready to be deployed, over 300 of them. We have regional contingency plans for tsunami, for tropical storm, for earthquake, and so on and so forth. In the 3 priority countries in ASEAN, we exercise them and we monitor our risk profile. And as part of our efforts to monitor risk, we also have come up with an initiative called the Armor that is basically trying to bridge science with decision making. However, the questions now is whether we have done enough, whether whatever that we have put in place is enough, particularly as we are living in this world of VUCA. First of all, I need to mention that we are not short of experience and knowledge. After all, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are the laboratory of disasters. And the best teacher, ladies and gentlemen, is our own mistakes and our experience. We have the academic and scientific community, solid ones in the region, and partners are ready to help the governments in ASEAN, to help everyone basically in making risk-informed decisions. However, the question is, have we ever learned from our experience after so many earthquakes, after recurring floods and tsunami and so forth? Have we utilized all we've got to better govern disaster risks in the world of VUCA? What else can be done so that we can better govern disaster risks in the world of VUCA? I'm not sure whether the late Dr. Robert Cates, who studied the relationship between society and the environment. He produced a paper called Natural Hazards, Climate Change and Adaptation, Persistent Questions and Answers in 2017. And he highlighted the importance of transformational adaptation, that in the world of VUCA, we cannot just have incremental adaptation or incremental steps. Greater requirement for transformational adaptation become more apparent and likely, especially where vulnerability is already high. So we would like to propose that we all shift from taking incremental steps to moving into transformational adaptation, because after all, the pressure is getting high and there's no choice but to make actually big changes. Now, I'd like to offer 5 focus areas of action, and this is where also AHA Center can contribute. First, not only listen to science, as Greta said, but also act on science to be better prepared. Our second edition of Armor has an impatient call. Time is running out. Why ASEAN must act now against climate emergency? Here we try to bridge the gap between science and decision making by showing the potential dire impact of 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature to the ASEAN region. And most importantly, what ASEAN can do about it collectively as a community. We need to understand it first, yes, of course, and then translate science into decision, and then decision into action. That's number one. Second, better communicate risk to stakeholders, including those in other sectors, including those unconverted, including the people and the communities, so that they all have a better grasp of the situation at hand. While facts may actually provide the inconvenient truth, they can also help us provide the basis for governance, for better spatial planning, for improving policy and regulatory frameworks, and for justifying budgetary allocations. So annually through Armor, we analyze each element of risk of all ASEAN countries and identify the changes so that the ASEAN countries can improve their risk profile, with the targeted indicators. Third, as more than 90% of our disasters can be anticipated, there is actually a window of opportunity for anticipatory actions before disaster happens. In ASEAN, our mechanism has been mostly on the basis of request or offer of assistance. So we wait until the disaster is declared first, and then we trigger the response mechanism, deploy our stockpile and our regional resources. However, Chapter 1 of our Armor publication this year say that ASEAN must transition into forecast-based regional preparedness and response. What does it mean? That means our trigger points will have to be refined to allow for early action. Our regional contingency plans, the ASEAN Joint Disaster Response Plan, will also have to be more proactive rather than reactive. Chapter 4 of our Armor publication indicates the need to shift from a crisis management approach to a risk management approach in addressing drought, using the so-called leading indicators rather than trailing indicators. Chapter 6 of Armor shows how Vietnam implements anticipatory humanitarian action by establishing triggers for heatwave early action. So it is possible to utilize this window of opportunity for anticipatory action. Fourth, disaster law. Strengthen disaster law, because this is the cornerstone of governance. And using disaster law, then we can ensure that no one is left behind. Of course, at the regional level, we have the legally binding agreement or ATMER. But this also need to be put into action. This also need to be replicated at the national level. And therefore, we have under Article 6 of the ATMER a call for the ASEAN countries to ensure that regulatory frameworks, policies, programs, SOPs, guidelines are also put in place. Now, this is something that has to be done continuously and at all levels. And there have to be some kind of way basically to continuously improve the disaster laws and see what can be done further. Fifth, scale up, create the multiplier effect. Why? Because we need to take not incremental but transformational action. We need to create a battalion of transformer because we are living in the world of VUCA. So if we cannot find the champion, then we need to be the champion. What can be done about it? We can create a program where we develop the leaders of the leaders. We can try to create synergy between the RR and climate change adaptation. That is really a buzzword. But apparently, there is a lack progress, the way I see it, in terms of synergy between the RR and CCA. A lot of platforms, policies, and programs are not actually meeting or intersecting to ensure that there is no duplication. So there has to be this kind of efforts so that we can streamline our efforts and ensure that a multiplier effect actually can be effective. Now, I guess I'll stop at that, and I look forward to the questions after this. Thank you very much. Marquesa, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lina, for that very inspiring rallying rally cry for ASEAN citizens to be transformers in this VUCA world. A very interesting presentation, very inspiring. So before we proceed, I would just like to give a few seconds to Colin. Colin, do you want to say something at this point?
Yes, I just before we continue with the Q&A, I just want to acknowledge the presence of our viewers today. I heard that we have viewers from across the globe, as far as Sweden. So I think the time difference, it's still morning in Sweden. So good morning. So we also have members of the cohort 1, the graduating batch of EMDRCM. So hello to my classmates, and of course to our professors also in attendance. So back to you, ma'am.
All right. Thanks, Colin, for that update. So again, thank you, Lina, for your very enlightening presentation. And your talk actually showed us that risk governance at the regional level is crucial, no? In that it provides a lot of support and also guidance to national risk governance structures and mechanisms at the country level. And I agree that with you that the region can no longer incrementally change, but to rapidly adapt and become champions or transformers, right? To be able to govern risk, especially in light of the climate emergency and increase resilience of our countries in this VUCA world. And I'm glad to know that you're shifting from crisis to risk management and using forecast-based early actions based on evidence-based triggers and early warning. So at this juncture, we have several questions ready for you from our audience. Colin has been curating the questions, so we probably have time for 2 to 3 questions. So Lina, are you ready? Okay. Are you there? Are you on mic and on cam? All right.
Yes.
Great. Okay, great. So the first question is, with that vision of ASEAN, will there be any changes and challenges in terms of reshaping the role of the non-ASEAN countries, especially the donor partners?
Oh, okay. The donor partners. Well, there are a few points here. When Syed Faisal, my predecessor, right? We had a lot of debate with him in the past when he was the executive director of the AHA Center. But he has this quote that is actually very interesting to me. When it comes to the ASEAN community, when it comes to one ASEAN, one response, we're not talking only about response, yeah, but it's actually the overall response within the ATMER. It's about those who live and breathe in this ASEAN region. Of course, we always have this national pride, right? We are Indonesian, we are Filipinos, we are the ASEAN citizens. But when it comes to risk reduction, when it comes to exposure to disaster, this kind of notion and also responsibility and contribution will have to be applied to those who live and breathe in our regions. So that's one, okay? Now, when it comes to partners, we cannot do it without our partners. Even for AHA Center, we had actually partners in the past that already put in trust, in AHA Center, even before we were just a piece of paper. Why? Because they believe in the vision of ASEAN. They believe that through regional commitment, we can create this multiplier effect. And they believe if this actually translated into full-timers like AHA Center, if this is actually concretized and then put into knowledge hub like AHA Center, then it can also help ASEAN to become more resilient. So when it comes to non-ASEAN countries, of course they are not ASEAN member states, but they are the ASEAN family. They are the ASEAN family. They have been working together with us, providing resources as well as insights like Japan, Australia, United States, European Union. Who else? Republic of Korea just supported us for the standardization and certification. These are just some of the dialogue partners of ASEAN. And not only that, the United Nations, we have over 10 UN agencies working with the AHA Center with ASEAN.
Right.
We have the Red Cross and Red Crescent family. We need
Yes.
the help of everyone. And I would like to see them as part of the battalion of transformers as well, because we need
That's
them
right.
for disaster loss. We have been working together with the IFRC. And then next week, ASEAN Secretariat is going to publish these guidelines on mainstreaming social protection into disaster management. That actually is the work with the social protection sector as well as the UN.
Yes,
Okay,
I'm
so
very
I
glad
guess,
to hear that all of these dialogue partners, not just donors, but dialogue partners, because they're
dialogue partners,
yes, we do have dialogue partners, and as well as donor organizations are still very much in the picture, and that's kind of like what you said, an extended family of ASEAN. So I'm very happy to
ASEAN.
hear
Yes.
that. So just to let everybody know that Adelina and I have worked together for, I think, at least 6 years, no, in the past. So I'm very happy to know that your ASEAN is marching forward and is even leading, no, the whole world in shifting from crisis to risk management, and being more proactive at that. So very happy. So there's another question, Lena, about what AHA Center will take on in the future, because the question of marine accidents and other accidents that cause tremendous damage to the environment. Is there a vision to address human-induced catastrophes in the same way that AHA Center takes on natural hazards?
Okay. Dr. Marquesa, you were there with me when we commemorated the 8th-year anniversary of AHA Center, right?
Yes.
That was last year. And we're going to be 9 years old this coming November.
Yeah, congratulations.
And last year, thank you. You have been part of the AHA Center. And already started actually asking this particular question because apparently, other sectors also start looking at the AHA Center, curious. And it's kind of like natural, because there are actually concrete actions that we have put, right? I mean, it's something that can be seen, right? Like the regional stockpile, the RAD, we have all the response measures and all that. So it's quite natural for the other sectors, the environment sector, the political sector and other sectors, to look at us and see how we can collaborate together. Now, but I should mention to the one asking the question that the ATME, the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, was drafted and developed and negotiated with tsunami in mind, with the Indian Ocean tsunami in mind. That was back in 2004. However, the drafters of ATME were actually cognizant of the fact that in the future, there may be actually, when we talk about hazards, right, we may not be, it may be very difficult to compartmentalize it. So if you look at the ATME Article number 5, every ASEAN countries has to identify both the so-called natural hazards as well as human-induced hazards. So the way I see it, in the future, and it's actually also stated in the Vision 2025, AHA Center may actually look into these other types of disaster. But the question is whether we do it instantly, at the same time or step by step, because we have so far 8 disasters to monitor already, and we have not really been good at in responding to drought. This is so on disaster. Bigger disasters will have further. Our AGDRP scenario, this is the ASEAN Joint Disaster Response Plan, which is our contingency plan, have been mostly focused on quick onset disasters.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so the question, which one to prioritize? Unfortunately, it's also the question about the resources.
Right.
Yeah. And we cannot stretch our resources too much. But
right.
But I think this is already part of the thinking process. It's still ongoing discussion.
Yeah.
And it is a reality, however, that we need to monitor other types of risks. It's called the multi-hazard risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, Lina, a few years back that you came to the Philippines in light of the Marawi conflict. I'm not sure if armed conflicts and social unrest would also be under the radar of AHA Center already in the present, or perhaps in the future. Are there any plans?
Okay. So the Marawi actually was our Pandora box, but actually it shows it was the first time. It was the first time that the AHA Center was requested to provide assistance in conflict setting. And it required us to consult the governing board first. Normally, when it comes to natural disasters, it was our response has been always has been almost automatic because we have the SOP, right? We have the procedures in place. But when it comes to conflict setting, we had to consult our governing board. That's what we did. And then, the agreement from the governing board was that, yes, you can go ahead because we focus on the humanitarian assistance. We focus on addressing the need, right? So the way I say it, again, this is still under discussion. Last year, we grouped them into the traffic light, right? This fall into the yellow zone, right? While pandemic fall into the red zone. But right now, we are trying to group them into the twilight zone, meaning that,
color is that
when it comes to in other types of disaster, we will. The twilight zone is the gray zone. It means that we need to see first how we can add value, because there may be other actors that already providing assistance. But if we are asked to do so, it will be limited to humanitarian assistance, not the overall complex management.
Okay, yeah. I think only that is
humanitarian assistance, even for COVID-19 also.
Yes.
Thank you very much. For COVID-19, we have been providing assistance only in terms of the logistics support.
Okay, so I think so. AHA Center is moving that way, and diversifying its functions and responsibilities, but in a slowly and targeted manner. So thank you very much, Adelina, for your presentation and for answering the questions. At this moment, I would like to give the floor now to our second speaker, Bernadia, who will speak about her work with city and local governments in Asia Pacific. So from looking at the overall view of the region, we'll zero in on the work that's happening at the local level, particularly with our cities in the region. You have the floor, Bernadia. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Marquesa, for the invitation and also the time. And very good afternoon to all speakers and participants. Magandang umaga. I hope I said right. Is it good morning or good afternoon?
Magandang umaga. It's good morning.
Okay, good morning.
To some, it's still in the morning. Okay, so
Yeah,
that's fine.
but anyway, there's a few Tagalogs I know. But I like to convey, basically a happy anniversary of Happy International Day of Disaster Risk Reductions to all of us. I think congratulations, at least we could say to all of you. And of course, many of us have been working quite well in terms of promoting this disaster risk reduction in whatever capacity we have. I think this is a good day that we are celebrating today. And for us, this is very important. Disaster risk reduction has been one of the top priorities of the work that UCLG ASPAC has been doing. Let me maybe share with you what UCLG ASPAC is. It's United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific. It was established actually. They have a very long history. Started 1930 in Belgium under the name of International Union of Local Authorities. So you could imagine that international cooperation among local governments have started more than 100 years ago. And then these three organizations, IULA, as well as UTO, United Towns Organization, both were set up in Europe together with Metropolis. Three organizations merged in 2004 and created one single network association of local governments and cities in the world. And we cover Asia Pacific, that includes also China, India, Indonesia. The office is in Jakarta for the ASPAC Secretariat. So we are the biggest one. And at the global level, we are connecting more than 250,000 cities and local governments directly and indirectly through the associations. So we are the united voice and world advocate of local governments, promoting values, objectives, and interests. Even we advocate the importance of local governments at the global levels, including United Nations. So in terms of, next slide, please. So we support the localizations. We provide advocacy, awareness raising, as well as capacity building and establishing linkages among local governments as well as the partners. So in terms of localization of global agenda, that's also include SDGs, Sendai Framework for Actions, Club Paris Agreement, and then also looking at the implementations of local agendas in cities and territories. Like when we look at this SDGs itself, more than 60 or 65% of the targets must be done at the local level. So this is very crucial and the role that local governments play. So we also promote local democracy and local leadership. This is a vital tools to drive forward local agenda in a way that is rooted in the culture, economic, environmental, as well as economic realities of each territory. So we really respect this local culture and yeah. So can we go, in terms of local commitments, local government's commitment for global agenda, I consider quite high in terms of implementation of Sendai Framework for Actions. I think more than, at the global level, more than 5,000 cities and local governments have joined this making a campaign on disaster risk reductions. And in terms of climate change, this is also shown from the commitment of more than 10,000 cities and local governments to reach this annual emissions reduction of 2.3 billion tons CO2 by 2030. This is under the framework of a global covenant of mayors for climate and energy. And UCAG ASPAC itself acts as the GCOM Secretariat for Southeast Asian regions. So we are fostering collaborations of partners, not only mitigating the carbon CO2, but also adapting to the resiliencies. Next. For the disaster risk governance at local levels, we know that governments cannot work alone. It requires strong partnerships with different stakeholders. So it also requires a cooperation, civil society, organization, academicians, professional association, private sectors, international donors, and of course citizens. As we are local governments are closest body to the citizens, it's very important that local governments also are given a good capacity, good authority, or good mandate in implementing the agenda, global agenda at the local level. So reducing disaster risk and enhancing resilience result from good governance. I think strong of leaderships, transparency, trust from the citizens. That's also part of the disaster risk reductions governance at the local level. So disaster risk governance affects the distribution of exposure and vulnerability, and in turn of disaster risk among different groups of people. So weak accountability, of course, entails greater room for corruption, especially is quite challenging also to see also how the disaster funds have been also distributed and spent. So in terms of disaster risk governance, the right side is shown the example how this is the case of Indonesian governments, starting with the policy and regulations and institution by setting up, for example, this local disaster unit in several cities and regions, and also having planning special. I think the challenges is in mainstreaming this disaster risk reduction in the overall plans and management of the cities. So finance has been also identified as a quite challenging part. This is why it's important also to find a kind of financial options for local government that can be accessed also by local governments. And the other one is multi-stakeholders coordination. So in the next slide, I show you challenges, because this is a COVID situation. Let me also share with you some of the challenges, also what works have been done related to COVID-19 responses, and also assisting local governments in preparing the recovery plans. So highly vulnerable population, we also see that urban densities cause also great effect of this COVID-19 in the case of big cities like Jakarta, Mumbai, and several others. Big city that became the epicenter of this COVID, yeah, and maintain essential services and access to assistance because of the, of course, the lack of fund during this COVID. Local revenue has been decreasing quite a lot because of the business activities also have been affected a lot by this COVID-19, but local governments are expected to continue giving the services to the people. Manage COVID-19 patients and keep people's discipline have been also seen as a big and major challenges by local government and leaders as well. So number of beds, number of doctors, number of nurses. So limited budget and revenue, yes, this is also one. And the other one that has been also our concern is limited data, and this also created some challenges by local governments in distributing these safety net programs during this COVID. And we know that maybe in the Philippines could be the same cases where data are quite difficult to get. And this situation also, we see some, many people lost a job because of the COVID. So this kind of information, clear information is definitely needed by the community. So lack of synchronization between central and local governments on protocols, stimulus packages. Central governments come up with stimulus packages, but in the implementation, we see also some gaps. Yeah? So this we see quite clear during these COVID situations. Next, so what we have been working on related to COVID-19, and of course, this is also in terms of disaster risk management and reductions. We have been compiling several initiatives, innovations that came from the local governments, members of UCAG ASPAC. So this information, everyone, students can also access in our website. So basically provided what, for example, South Korean cities, Daegu, Daejeon, Seoul have been doing. And what exactly interesting is that some of those practices have been transferred, like treaties, trace, track, and also treatments. I think this is quite interesting to see that this has been also transferred to several cities, including Jakarta. So virtual discussions forums, I think we have already organized in different kind of different kind of teams, local economic development, how we bring back the tourism, and also we see how telemedicine. So we're looking at the different aspects of opportunities that local governments can grab during the situations. That's also include like digitalization of traditional markets, and also using this our role as in enabling organization for promoting the impact of COVID-19 and SDGs. We're also looking at those all the 17 goals of SDGs and how this our responses can also accelerate the SDGs. Next. And these local initiatives have been very huge. I think we have been collecting almost, and it's available in the platform at the global level as well as in the Asia Pacific level. More than, I think, more than thousands, thousands initiatives have been also compiled. This include in terms of supply chains, how can we improve this food resiliency, basic goods. This is the example of Iriga. Mayor has been very active in promoting this. And what interesting is that this initiative didn't come out because of the COVID, but they already have this experience earlier, and they learn from that experience, and they continue having this during the COVID time as well. So I think this is quite interesting to see that a lot of local initiatives actually have started way back before the COVID happens. And in terms of technology, I think it's very clear that local governments need to grab these chances that appear because of this working from home, and as well as the small activities on businesses. So they managed to really capture that and then transform this offline system into online systems, having this traditional market, for example. And this plan was already there in some cities, but could not be implemented. But because of the COVID-19, some of the cities accelerated this plan much earlier. So this is much faster than what initially planned. So economic and stimulus packages, I think this Jeonju City Safety Net Program is one of the best practices in South Korea. They give incentive to small businesses, and even for, taxes. So I think some of those initiatives also have been spread out through all many cities in Asia as well. Community engagement and grassroots voluntary, and we see very interesting from this COVID-19. I think there is a strong bond among the communities, and also like with neighborhoods, their neighborhoods. So there are several grassroots voluntary initiatives that came. For example, Jakotongo, this is neighborhood initiative in Central Java, Indonesia. And we also see several other initiatives in Malaysia with a similar approach, basically matching between what needs, what are needed, and then what others can offer. So data synchronization, because of the website that we managed to connect local governments and central governments, and some local governments started this dashboard template for COVID-19. And this also applicable and can be accessed by citizens. Yeah. Next, and local, this is some local initiatives. I already mentioned Jeju initiatives, including also, traditional markets, and Iriga also launches these vegetables on wheels to keep villages at home. Next. So I think I did mention city-to-city solidarity in the spirit of humanism have been seen very strongly during this time. Several cities also supported other cities, providing supports like mask, body thermometer, and then whatever facilities that other cities need. So we see very strongly during this at these situations. Yeah. Like Surabaya Mayor is our president of UCLG ASPAC at this moment. She also received some support from the Chinese cities, and Iriga also received the same. Next. So I think some people get confused with the word new normal. So this is why we put the new, actually the better word could be the new adaptive habits. I think I already mentioned clearly here that strong collaborations with different stakeholders have been seen quite visible here. And I think the role of different stakeholders is crucial. They have also a certain role to play. Like, for academician, I think I completely agree with the previous speaker that mentioned, indeed, research, sometimes are not connected with decision-making persons or officials. I think it's important that, how can we bring closer between good or genuine research into policies. So I think it's definitely I think necessary that we should and we know that many local governments need evidence based scientific base. I think the Chinese members mentioned the importance of trusting the scientists, but I think this is a question also we want to hear from you, because how can we also get a very good kind of research that really can support decision makers in the process. And media definitely play important role because good information, or really information that can be trusted by the people, also need strong role here. Next, I think this is going to be my last two slides. What we see as a lessons learned from the COVID-19, local governments have taken various innovative solutions to handle the pandemic and their impacts. We also found that some mayors lost their lives because of this, COVID-19. We see very clearly that they are the front liner in this fighting. So innovative and effective efforts in disaster risk reduction and handling the pandemic matter. So clear information, communications between local governments and communities are the key, I think. And usage of technology apps can increase responsiveness of local governments. And then integrated approach to ensure co-benefits as local governments experience the significant budget costs. I don't know in the case of Philippines, I think this is also we see in many local governments in Indonesia as well as in other countries in handling the pandemic. And there was also a request from the government of Indonesia for refocusing and reallocating their budget to fight for COVID-19. So the integrated approach can be a much efficient way to ensure multiple sectors and issues are covered and co-benefited. And we also introduced several possible budgets that local governments can access. What we want is not just waiting the support from central governments, but we would like to get kind of mandates, authorities, so that several financial options can be accessed by local governments. So this include crowdfundings, zakat, as well as the bonds, municipal bonds. Even Indonesia doesn't have one single municipal bonds at this moment. And building back better, recover to normal bounce backs does not always means the best options. The pandemic provides the opportunity to reflect on lessons learned and to build back better and faster and stronger. So the next slide, basically the overall, can we go to in the conclusions? we see political will and leadership are key in developing this disaster reduction and resilience strategy. Like in Bangladesh, more than 300 cities have signed up this MCR, the campaign, but the important is implementation. So we are very happy that UNDRR took now, this important of implementation rather than just sign up this MCR campaign. So engage communities, governments alone cannot address DRR. Every DRR success stories involves planning and implementation. So I think this is one of the big challenges because how can risk be mainstream in planning in all sectors? And if we can have a good plans flood can also be avoided or can be minimized, and this is also gives importance to community or civil society involvement. In some cases it is local governments leading the process of disaster risk reduction and resilient building. But in many other cases, community themselves alone or with the support of non-governmental organizations, academicians, private sectors can take a lead. So actually I'm looking forward to also hearing from other speaker from Hotel Resilient, because this is first time I heard about this Hotel Resilient, and it's nice to see also that there are also private sectors initiatives in this. Yeah? And involvement of other sectors, universities and local NGOs can play a key role as intermediaries between local governments and communities. And participatory mechanism in place, local actors really need to engage meaningfully to make a difference. So here, participatory mechanisms should be in place to support local governments and local actors working together. I think this is all what we can share with you. I'm happy to share the slides to all the students, and always happy to get engaged with young students and brainstorm each other. I think this is a nice time. So thank you. Offers to you, Markisa.
All right. Thank you very much, Bernadia. Great presentation as well. Thank you so much. I don't know about young students. We don't really have very young students.
Sorry, but you all heart, yeah, young in heart, huh?
Young at heart, definitely. Yeah, I'm kidding. Of course, we have young students, young at heart students. No, so thank you again. Your presentation highlighted the covenant of the mayors for climate and energy. That's very interesting, no? And you emphasized the need for collaboration, accountability, and transparency with all actors and stakeholders. So I'm very happy to know that the UCLG is an enabler of local governments to meet the challenges of COVID-19. There are questions about certain things. For example, could you explain a little bit more on the financing that you mentioned, particularly the zakat? You are on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you. Maybe the others can also help me answer this, because zakat is a term used in Islam, in which you donate a part of the income to the society, to the community. So the amount is quite huge actually, and then they don't really use, normally they use it for social social support systems, and then but because of this COVID, they turn into also supporting the others. I think this is why I don't know. I don't think you have zakat in the Philippines, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But it's obligation actually for Muslim. But I don't remember the percentage. I hope somebody can help me. Certain percentage, 10%, I think. That you need to contribute to, and I don't recall the amount, but it's quite huge. The amount that collected from people through zakat.
So it's a kind of tithing. perhaps.
Yes.
Okay, then it's 10%. Yes.
10%, yes. I think 10%, but I'm not sure. Maybe somebody can help me with that.
Okay. So there's another question
Oh,
regarding
2.5%. Sorry,
only 2.5.
2.5%, yes.
Okay. All
Be
right.
conducted by religious leaders in Islam. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a form of crowdsourcing.
Yes, formal.
Okay. All right.
It's a
So
mandatory for obligation for Muslim.
for Muslims. Yeah. Okay. So there's also a question on COVID-19 pandemic response, particularly at the grassroots level. And one of the greatest challenges is the lack of systematic collaboration and communication platform within the LGU or the local governments and the national level. So the communication and coordination collaboration between the local and the national governments. Does UCLG have some proposed strategies or best practices in addressing this challenge?
Actually, for this, because we are the Association of Local Governments, but we also have close collaboration with several ministries. So basically, our role is to bridge what actually central governments do in terms of, I'm just talking on the case of COVID-19. And then what kind of policies that central governments gave, and then we provide this bridge between local governments to understand. Like, for example, there was miscommunication last time between how the local governments try to understand the policies or instruction that came from the central governments in terms of what task group, because it was required by central government that local governments also create what we call it task group in handling COVID. And it was required by central government that the head of task group supposed to be mayors, but in some cities are not the mayors but the head of planning. So we fixed this by giving the basically inviting the people from the central governments to speak to local governments, and then make them also aware what does it mean. So this is the bridge that we give. In terms of relationship with the community, we also organize through this sharing. We invited the youth, young people. We found that, like for example, a young group of in Malaysia, they created the apps to provide support, to neighborhoods, but it didn't get recognition from local government. So we really try to bring what local initiatives and make local governments aware about this. So it's top up, bottom up, and top down kind of communications.
Right. So you need both approaches, from the bottom going up and from the top going down. So thank you very much, Bernadia, again, for a very enlightening, inspiring presentation.
I just want to add one thing, to say possible, because there is a question also. We also have this ASEAN Mayors Forum. I think this is good also to hear the presentation from AHA Center, and we are looking forward to working with AHA Center on this, as the ASEAN Mayors Forum has received the affiliation from the ASEAN Secretariat. And I think it's important that, and one of the, of course, the activities related to disaster risk reduction. So I think it's ASEAN MESOM is the only local governments network that received affiliation by ASEAN, and it's put under others, because we argued last time they wanted to put this under certain pillar, socio-economic pillar, but I said no, it's not possible. Local governments are across all the pillars. It's not just one pillar, so that's why they put us under others.
Yes,
interesting also.
That's very good development, Bernadia, that you're now officially affiliated with ASEAN. So perhaps the next stop is AHA Center, and you can also coordinate and collaborate with Adelina. So, and also with Bijan, as you mentioned. So this is something new for you, Hotel Resilient. So at this point, For our last presentation, may I call on Bijan, who will share the perspective from the private sector on building more disaster and climate resilient accommodation services. So you have the floor, Bijan.
Thank you, Marquesa. Good afternoon here, I guess still morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure and treat to be able to be here virtually with you. The last time I was at AIM, I was there in person last December before the crazy VUCA world hit us with the pandemic. I was actually meeting at the AIM cafeteria with someone who's present here, Ace Esmeralda, one of your students, and we were brainstorming together on how do we think beyond sort of the security minded sort of crisis management in the hotel sector towards a more holistic and inclusive approach. And that's really the mission of Hotel Resilient and what I would love to talk to you about today. So if you kind of look around, there seems to be a new label on the market every day, from big chain hotels in competition with each other to bring out their own labels, Hilton partnering with the disinfecting brand Lysol to bring out the Clean Stay label to all kinds of other hotels coming up with their own labels. And then you've got, of course, national governments. Singapore Clean was one of the first ones to move on this and try to align the private sector behind guidelines and they put out the Singapore Clean protocols. Meanwhile, every government has developed their own national guidelines, and some of them are quite involved and comprehensive. You've got the security companies, the ones that did traditionally health and safety and security certifications. They're of course coming up with their own certifications, but what is kind of missing is a international body that sets a benchmark and an internationally recognized standard throughout the industry, no matter if you're in Thailand or in Panama, that looks at this based on the latest science and research. And the closest we get to that is the World Travel and Tourism Council that put out its Safe Travels standards. But if you look at it, it's just a few pages for the hospitality sector. It's very thin in content. So there is sort of that aspect of it. And here's a cartoon, I think, that illustrates another point. If you are from the vantage point of, a hotel on this hill, looking straight ahead, what you see is, COVID-19 coming at you. And, you might be excused to think, be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. Because right now we are so focused on hygiene and enhanced cleaning and physical distancing, as we should be. But if you took a bit of a further look out, we talked about social unrest already. We talked about the VUCA world and, what structural changes could happen or happening already in the tourism market in this case, financial recessions and all the uncertainty that brings with it. And, that's a crisis. Can we reckon with that? And you obviously don't have to look too far behind that to see the impending aspects of climate change, the increased severity and frequency of natural disasters, which is the topic that we're talking about. So that puts hygiene and safety or security in a very limited perspective. And I think we're better helped if we look to another concept, and that's really the concept of resilience. In its literal sense, resilience, Latin root, means the ability to bounce back, to return to an initial state after a stress or disruption. But there's also an alternative way to look at resilient as a notion of bounce forward. And I think both Adelina and Bernadilla were mentioning this throughout their talk, and they have, of course, a more holistic, broader look at this. And what I'd like to focus maybe today is just on this hospitality sector. What does it mean to bounce forward? The idea that the state that you want to bounce back to may not even be a desirable state to come back to. And the crisis itself provides an opportunity to reposition yourself. And I think that's really what COVID-19 brings to this. And before we go further, I really want to simplify, and I know, there's tons of research over decades on resilience. So to simplify it here in sort of two concepts is an oversimplification. But for the purposes of this presentation, you can think about resilience through the engineering approach, where you have very simple terms, the idea to withstand or to cope with some kind of a disruption, so that you don't lead to a state of failure. You can absorb that shock and come back into your original state. That's typically the engineering definition of resilience, and what kind of redundancies you have to build into the system to cope with that. But we've also been talking throughout today with another view of resilience, and that's really the ability to transform and adapt, which is not only, as Adelina said, about incremental steps towards being more robust, but how can we process a disruptive event so that we emerge stronger on the other side. And with that, I want to show two examples of these two types of resilience concepts. So you might, even though it seems like another lifetime, remember back to the earthquake on the 31st of October 2019 in Mindanao. And this is a picture that was in the media back then quite often in Kidapawan City, Eva's Hotel. And you don't have to be an earthquake engineer to recognize this building has problems. You've got, essentially no structural support on the first floor. We call that a soft story in earthquake engineering. So what happens with the soft story effect? This is the after picture. You don't see a first floor anymore. It pancakes down because you didn't have any kind of structural support to hold that building. Then you have a quite irregular structure, and earthquake takes advantage of any kind of irregularity. And so you can see the columns have failed, and this building is not habitable. So we know in earthquake engineering how to deal with things like this, and how we can build buildings so that they withstand earthquake forces. And that's where the robustness of the building through earthquake norms is an approach that we use to deal with these types of disasters. But here's some other pictures as well. This is a hotel in Vietnam that's used sort of traditional bamboo construction, which is a wonderful material to withstand earthquake forces. But this one is actually built so that it can deal with floods as well. So, multi-purpose use of material in an energy efficient way, or using modern technology such as smart buildings to think about green roof design, more water efficiency, renewable energy, all the way to influencing consumer behavior are ideas we talk about. And it would help us to think about resilience, not only in terms of reducing the risk of a disruptive event or coping with it, but also in a more holistic way. And what really brought this home to me personally was when I was in the Maldives, and we were looking at these hotels that had set up these wonderful seawalls to deal with the flood, had built according to earthquake norms, but they were dredging the sand of the neighboring island. That had led into massive disruption on the neighboring island, also on the community level. Taking jobs away and completely disrupting the local livelihoods. So can we call that hotel resilient because it's withstanding, earthquakes and floods and storms? Or do we really need to think about resilience in the way that is transformative? And that really brings us to the aim of Hotel Resilient, and the story where it started is that there was a need to develop standards and tools specifically for the accommodation services that can be used to demonstrate disaster and climate resilience based on scientific and risk-based ways of thinking about it. And at the same time, because it's important in the private sector, create market value. So The story began in 2013 with the global assessment report that comes out every 2 years. And the global assessment report finding was that there are no internationally recognized and supported by industry standards on disaster risk management and climate change adaptation that are specifically developed for accommodation services. And that in an industry that has all kinds of standards, from sustainability to corporate social responsibility to food and health. So heavily regulated industry. And given the fact that we know so much about disaster resilience and risk modeling, there was a gap that needed to be addressed. And so in 2015, a scoping study was put out by the Global Initiative for Disaster Risk Management through some German funding. And the idea was to see if hotels would at all be receptive to these types of standards. And the Philippines was one of the places that the scoping study took place. Thailand, Indonesia, and the Maldives were 3 other places. And in fact, the study found that not only is there a market incentive for hotels to demonstrate to their guests, to their insurers, to their tour operators, that they are prepared to deal with a disaster, but in fact, in places like in the Philippines, Indonesia, Maldives, and Thailand, where you're dealing with disasters and it's part of your awareness, there is a survival aspect to this. We want to be able to survive this, and we want to be able to do it well, not in an ad hoc way. And so that's where we also came into the picture. At the time, I was at the university, at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and we led this consortium of both private sector and university partners. And our objective was to put these standards in place and develop essentially a global standard for climate and disaster resilience that are based on risk-driven approaches and the latest scientific research. And that really means when you talk about disaster risk, you can't forget the risk component. You have to be able to identify it. And it's not enough for an insurance to know the risk of a hotel. It's also good if the hotelier knows what kind of risks it is impacted by, especially because now we're in a state where a lot of these global models have become democratized, and we have at high resolution available to us information about intensity and frequency of various kinds of natural hazards. So why not bring that directly to the hotel and make sure the standards are not generic standards on crisis management, but they are risk-based and they're disaggregated depending on your risk portfolio. And for that, you need a software. So we had to put together a software, and so that the standards don't end up as a big manual on your desk, there was e-learning and training components that had to be developed as part of a system. And this was done through the Hotel Resilient Initiative, supported by the Global Initiative on Disaster Risk Management, and in partnership with PATA, the Pacific Asia Travel Association, as well as the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. At the time, it was still called UN ISDR. And so that was 2015, and it took us a good 2 years to build the standards, and I'll talk about a little bit how that process took place. But we ended up with a software platform. The standard itself is 250 elements, and it's composed into 9 different components and 3 main categories. So we say buildings, but it's really buildings and sites. So we consider what are sort of the site conditions when the hazard comes, all the way from the foundation to the roof of the building components inside. All of those are characterized according to their vulnerability, and then they interact with the hazard values that we have picked up from modeling to provide a risk profile of the hotel. Then we get into systems. We talk here about communication systems, crisis communication systems, warning system, evacuation systems. Critical infrastructure in a hotel would be HVAC, a backup generator, and all sorts of things that you want to have protected. And then you get into sort of the roof, which is management processes on how do you communicate with guests, with staff, with media, what are your protocols, what are your roles and responsibilities, how do you go about business continuity, and these sorts of aspects that are folded under the management category. So altogether we have 250 elements. And we didn't start from scratch here. We essentially looked and saw there is a lot available in terms of DRM standards, the ISO standards, of course, business continuity standards. FEMA has put out work. So we looked at what is the state of the art in literature with a focus on how does this relate to a hotel. So you really have to understand the processes, the operational processes, the needs and the pain points of a hotel manager or a security officer or a front desk person, and try to frame those protocols in terms of their jobs. And another important part of this was to make sure that we don't forget about local or regional issues. At the time where the focus is to put a global standard, you can't forget about norms that are different in the Philippines than in Panama, for example. So you want to make sure you address these local issues as well and build the global framework malleable enough so that you can consider locality. And so that we don't develop all this in a vacuum, it was important to put together a participatory process for both the development and the validation of these indicators. And this is a typical workshop. This was in Bohol, in one of the hotels, where we worked together hand in hand with hoteliers to understand the processes, their needs, and validate the various standards that we were putting together with them. So when you look at one of these standards, as I said, it's disaggregated based on hazard type. So if it's an earthquake, you might have to consider different things, but not only that, you might have to consider different things depending on your role or your job in a hotel, whether you're in housekeeping, engineering, security, front desk, or food and beverage. So it's really trying to understand the perspective of the user and then superimpose on that our understanding of what's the latest science and understanding on the risk side. And as I mentioned, we need a software for this because we have to put forward the risk component, and that's the whole analytics part of the software, but also then a audit dashboard that then, once you've profiled the risk, creates the audit for you, and you go step by step through the individual protocols, through the criteria, you comply or you don't comply, and you get a score out at the end. You don't just end with the score. I'll show you a little bit later what you can do then after you have a score. But first, we look here in terms of 9 different hazards for which we have obtained through RiskLayer, which is a partner company, global models. Most of these are globally available, publicly available. Some of these are proprietary. And in some cases, like in the Philippines, you really want to go to FEWOLX and look at what they have been doing, because what they're doing is way more detailed than some of the global models for some of these hazards. But earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, tropical cyclones, as well as landslides, bushfire, volcanoes, technological types of hazards. So if that's a chemical plant, for example, or an explosion, that would be considered technological hazards. And then we even had, before the pandemic, a component on disease outbreak. Of course, that took a life of its own after the pandemic, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And very importantly, what is the impact of climate change on the variability on these hazards? So to get a sense for sort of the outputs, this is a map of Bohol, where you have essentially the tsunami hazard, earthquake induced landslide hazard, earthquakes and floods. And what you can then do is to think about it in terms of a performance-based methodology. And you can think and say, okay, is the hotel in terms of preparedness, response, and recovery at what stage? Obviously you want to be in the green, but if you're for a certain hazard in the yellow or in the red, that's where you want to take action. And to put it in monetary terms, we think about probabilistic models that allow us to think about annual average losses projected over to the next 30 years. So then what would be the loss of a hotel from an earthquake in the next 30 years? And here you might then just look at the dollar value and the chance of that occurring. So 1 in 7 chance of getting about $690,000 of losses over the next 30 years is probably going to drive the equation versus a 1 in 1,500 chance of getting a little bit more. So that's the way an insurance would look at that, but why not put that information in the hands of hotels? This is skipping around, sorry. There we go. So climate variability and climate change projections is another component that we are bringing into the software. So we also want to give a sense to the hotelier, what is their exposure to future climates in terms of extreme precipitation, in terms of heat wave incidents, frost days, dry spells, or what is the average high temperature that they might expect, and account for this variability in our hazard assessment. So not just a pure hazard assessment for conditions now, but also bring into it global climate change models that are regionalized and provide indicators for hotels to be able to get a sense for their climate resilience. And sort of the output of the software is essentially a resilience score, which takes into account not just your risk profile, but what are you doing in terms of reducing the risk and dealing with it. So that's the idea of a resilience score. It's then broken down in preparedness, response, recovery, and each one of these items has a certain proportion that can be allocated to these 3 areas. But also we want to show a pure risk per peril, per hazard type, so that one can think about where do I want to focus and put my energy. And that's the analytics part of it. There's an e-learning component because there is quite a lot of material, 250 elements. Some of these elements are quite technical. So we try to make this as approachable as possible. And there's 30 hours of e-learning content over 9 modules that take the hotel staff through these areas that are covered in the standard, so that there is an understanding of what am I looking at and some guidelines on what can I do now about it, where are areas of implementation. So I want to go back again to this landscape of health and safety standards. And as we said, 2 gaps. One, the lack of an oversight body that is really looking across the board on what is the latest science and how do we integrate that into protocols that are based on an international framework. And can we now go beyond this health and safety perspective and start setting the path forward? You know, maybe right now is not the bandwidth to think about more holistic issues, but we have a unique opportunity to do this the right way. If we're going to spend a lot of time dealing with protocols, now is the time to think about it in a multi-hazard way and on a disaster risk framework, rather than just this very limited way. And there's a lot that a hotel now has to think about, you know, and they're quite overwhelmed by all of this. As we work with small hotels, especially, you can see the desperation in how you can take the theory of, you know, a national guideline and then implement that based on very unique conditions. Think of a boutique hotel, or think to a hotel that is catering to adventure travel. You know, they're set up differently, and these standards take a very broad brush on all of this. So there's quite some complexity in there when it comes to the implementation. So what we've tried to do beyond setting this up and say, okay, here's a first case where you can think about this in a DRM, disaster risk management framework, and you know, you should really consider exposure and how do you control risk, how do you control for risk, how do you define vulnerabilities at your site. You know, that relates to your hospital capacity, where your vulnerable guests are, the density of the area. So these are typically not considered in your standards that you see. But then, of course, we can't forget about the core of all this: enhanced cleaning, safe hygiene, physical distancing. So we go through quite some detail there. And think about it not just for a hotel main operations, but hotels have a lot of amenities. They have restaurants, they have gift shops, they have spas, beachside. So what would be the implementation of these three pillars in terms of those particular amenities. And then, of course, the real area where DRM thinking is very prevalent is how you define your protocols in a risk-based way, how you can think about response in terms also of business continuity, and how you can think about staff roles and responsibilities. So I won't go through all these standards. It's not the focus of this talk, but I did want to show you a quick view of how the software then works. So here you can see analytics, and the analytics beyond the hazard stuff for now, we've also brought in sub-country level COVID-19 exposure data. So hotelier can see if I'm getting a guest from Germany, from the state of Baden-Württemberg, where I'm sitting right now, what is the latest COVID exposure rate? And is that coming from a high-risk destination? And then you can start your audit, and you go through these elements in the audit. And once you're done, you end up with a view like this. It's built as a traffic light system where essentially you want to be in the green, but you might be in some areas where you're partially complying in orange, and if you're not complying at all, in red. And those are areas where you can then start taking action. So we also wanted to put in some guidance in the software. So if I'm here in the yellow or in the orange, and I'm only maybe complying with 3 criteria, what are some additional areas of action? And those are some recommended actions that they could take. And to make it simple, they can then start creating tasks and assign a due date, assign a person responsible, assign a priority, and start picking off these types of actions so that they, could take some time, but eventually they have sort of a dashboard in front of them that, reminds them of how to become more resilient. And also for COVID-19, we've put together, along the Hotel Resilient Framework, a e-learning program that takes you through each one of these areas, so that helps you digest and break down these components into more interactive videos and additional resources that a hotel can read. So please do check it out. It's free. Any hotel can or if you're not a hotel, if you're just curious, app.hotelresilient.org. You can just sign up here. Once you provide your email address, you get a login authorization, and you can already start doing the audit and using the analytics and getting started. So I do want to spend a few minutes that maybe I still have left, if I haven't gone too long.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Just three more slides on what we have been doing and perhaps set the stage for discussions later as well. So I think we really have an opportunity now to work together as private sector with government and with industry representatives to think about a more resilient way, transformative way of thinking. And the Department of Tourism in the Philippines has been at the forefront of that, and we have been talking to them, and we're in the process of developing a memorandum of agreement that would include conduct of webinars, training workshops, and assessments that we can do through our audit software. So that's in the Philippines. In other places, like in Phuket, we have partnered with hotel associations, and where we're providing essentially free certifications at the moment in exchange for all kinds of work that we're doing, peer-to-peer knowledge sharing and knowledge building with the hotels there. And to various kinds of collaborations that we have with ministries of tourism in places like Ecuador or Panama, or with an NGO called Sustain Sri Lanka that represents sort of smaller hotels that are sustainability minded in Sri Lanka. And the idea there is to really think about this notion of variability across the hotel sector, especially with a focus on small, medium hotels. What are their needs? How can we support them with tools and help these ministries of tourism develop their own protocols? And in some places, we actually can offer certifications on site. I mentioned ACE at the beginning of this talk, and so we have partnered together here in the Philippines to look at certifications in Manila and Cebu. And we have a partnership also in the Maldives with a private company called Ensure, where our protocols can be self-assessed using the software, but then we can also send an on-site third-party auditor to look at the hotels and provide certifications to them. There's a lot more that you can find out and read about on the website. So I'll stop here and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bijan. Very interesting talk. Thank you for walking us through the development process and the products of Hotel Resilient, like the software, the e-learning, and the other outputs that you've shared through your presentation. So this kind of change, the transformative change that I think has been a common thread in all the presentations, um, needs all sectors to hold hands and a participatory process, to make it happen. And this in your presentation, we highlight the critical role of the private corporate sector in reducing disaster risks, or not just disaster risks. I mean all types of hazards, technological hazards, including the pandemic, with your COVID-ready standards. That is based on the latest science and research. So that has been a very long journey, I think, but you have finally reached the finish line. And so we have a few questions, and I think you saved the best for last when you mentioned that it's all for free. So I think you should maybe give us some clarification when you say that it's free, and that any hotel or corporation could avail of these services for no charge.
Yeah, so I can clarify that. Of course, as I said in the talk, and we have an opportunity now. We have a unique opportunity to think about a new way of mitigating and dealing with a crisis and a risk-based way. So we see this as something that we can provide to the hotel industry, and so we don't want to charge for it. It's something that we believe every hotel can benefit from and use in order to develop their own audits, or use our tools to conduct the audits. So all of that, the e-learning and the audits, are available on the platform and free for any hotel to use. Where we have to put in our own resources, and that's 2 to 3 hours, maybe more, of someone's time to review detailed SOPs that a hotel sends us in order to be able to certify them. Of course, that's where we need to get compensated to run as a sustainable organization. So our certifications are provided to people, hotels that become members on our platform. And I think our prices are very affordable when you compare that across the industry, but that's compensating us for our time.
Of course, yes. And there's another question that's related to this one. They say that, the very impressive and interesting system, could it also be applied or benchmarked to other types of infrastructure? For example, Bernadia heads the UCLG ASPAC, and her client is the, local governments and city governments, which, have these public assets like the city hall or the hospitals and, certain critical infrastructures. Could they also use your certification standards, or even just the different products that you mentioned?
Super question. And it's actually our objective to think about this beyond the hospitality sector. There's a project that we're starting in Myanmar that is looking at hospitals and government buildings. And of course, what's important to understand there, you can't take these hotel standards and superimpose them now on a school or a hospital or a government building. There is a very important process if you take the, user design thinking that went behind this, of understanding how a hotel works, understanding in detail their processes. In the same way, you'd have to understand what are criticalities in a hospital or in a school or for a government building. And there's so much research on that. So it's a matter also of accumulating that body of work. And then, of course, you have a tool that's already developed in terms of the analytics, in terms of the audit, so that you can, once you've defined the standards and the protocols, you can then import that into the tool, and you can go through the same process.
Okay, thank you very much, Bijan, for answering the questions from our audience. At this point, I'd like to give the few seconds to Colin for the before we go into the panel discussion. Do you have any um, announcements, Colin, or anything from our audience and Facebook?
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Marquesa. I just want to say hello to some of our people from people who are joining us via Facebook today. Let's read a few remarks. Let's go to Alan Toto Astrologo. Hi, good day. Chechen Pelzang, hello. Encarnacion Borhal, good afternoon, everyone. Jam Gelson, good afternoon. Shemen, the Green Heart. Joining from General Santos City. Dr. Bernadia, I think you have a friend here, Nieves Somera. Good to see you, Bernadia. Jamila, good afternoon. Sony Dolendo, Sambat Kim, thank you as well for joining us. And we're now going, before I give it to Prof. Marquesa, we are going to a panel discussion. I want to encourage our, aside from our people joining us in Zoom today, I would like to encourage the people from Facebook to also post their questions and their comments and their thoughts. We are reading all your responses right now, and yeah, please feel free to join us. Thank you. Back to you, Prof. Marquesa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. So now we move on to the next part of the program, which is our panel discussion. So welcome to the panel discussion to our good friends and speakers of our webinar. So we have heard all of your presentations, and thank you for sharing your organization's risk governance, institutional, policy and regulatory mechanisms for managing risks, and how effective they are in stepping up to the challenges of the VUCA world, given the concurrent shocks and the multiple risks we are facing in these times. So I'm very aware of the time right now. So maybe I will, I have several questions lined up. Maybe I will skip some of them and go to first the individual questions, and then to the common questions to all of you. So I would like to address this question first to Bijan and Bernadia. So we are well aware that disaster risk governance has traditionally been fragmented among local, national, and regional entities, and among sectors: public, corporate, business, academic, and non-government. So this question was already posed earlier, but what I want to point out is that there's the positive side of it. Let's look at the positive side, that there are opportunities that could be taken to strengthen disaster risk governance. So in the case of Bijan, for example, how can Hotel Resilient help bridge this gaps between the private sector and the for example, the non-government sector, or even the vertical integration from the local where your hotels are located to the national and even regional entities? Are there plans?
Exactly. No, I think, as you said, Marquesa, the opportunity can, no one can miss it. It's so obvious. Governments have been pushed overnight, essentially, to having to produce protocols and norms. And on the other hand, private sector has been pushed into this uncomfortable situation of having to implement that and real quick. So it's easy in this kind of a mess to try to be, pragmatic and expedient about this, and just do what's needed, and to think about, the opportunity it presents itself to actually think about a more long-term perspective. And here, I think there's a few things that we've learned, in terms of digital innovation. The pandemic has taught us that there's a lot of room, both on the government side and the private sector, to use digital technology, or technology in general, as a more effective tool in helping reduce risk. I think the pandemic has opened us to this bounce forward thinking, which may have been very far removed from most people's way of thinking, but we're put into an action and we're forced to think with that mentality. So how do we do good on that capacity that is there? Plant the seeds while the soil is there, and also in terms of a multi-stakeholder and cross-national approach. So this is an international pandemic; it's affected the entire globe. So I think there are opportunities to think beyond national interests and beyond single sector. And we know the forces that oppose that are there as well. But the opportunity is there to use this as a leveraging point, and really, end up in a better position than we were before it.
Thank you, Bijan. That's very nicely said. Digital innovation can actually help us bounce forward, and that there are opportunities to, across countries for cooperation, not just across cities, but also across countries, especially in this global pandemic. What about Bernadia? Would you like to add to that?
Thank you. I think what we feel here that during this disaster, we are not alone. We are not alone because we also see a lot of helps from different kind of partners and of course local governments, and we are working under network of networks. So we see good best practices, good and best practices that manage also to inspire others to leapfrog, so that they can do faster than what the others have done earlier. I think this kind of inspiration is very, very important. And now with these facilities, we all very familiar with Zooms and Webex. I think this sharing happens quite fast. We don't need to have a physical visits. I think this digitalization plays a very, 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 very and give a great opportunity for us. And we are now preparing the manifesto for UCAG ASPAC towards the 5 years direction. And we include digitalization. How can digitalization shape the future of cities and regions in Asia Pacific particularly? And of course, a lot of challenges. But the important is that we need also good enabling environments provided to local governments in terms of decentralization level, in terms of support mechanism, because Asia is very diverse region. You see also a very centralized system, and also decentralized systems in the Philippines and India and others. And sometimes in the implementation are not as beautiful as written in the papers. I think this is what we need. We require a good enabling environments for local governments to perform, so that they can be best in managing the risk and as well as reducing the risk. As we know, communities depends very much also to good performance of local governments or LGUs. And I think the role of association in the nations are very, very crucial here. There are also LCP. I'm happy to see friends.
Right.
Too.
Right.
So I think this needed. So let's have a much stronger cooperation among all of us.
Yes. So thank you very much. Bernadia, I think that's a very good point, that, all this innovations and digitalization using technology to facilitate the sharing across different LGUs or local governments within the country and across countries, just like what UCLG is doing as a sort of a force multiplier for the Asia Pacific region. So now, may I ask a question addressed to Adelina? So is Adelina still there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. All right. So, Lina, you mentioned, the vision of AHA or ASEAN, and the leadership of ASEAN in disaster management. And so, on AHA Center's leadership in the role of in disaster risk governance, how does AHA Center encourage collaboration among countries, among member states, And how do you ensure, because you mentioned that some countries are more ahead in terms of risk governance, that no country is left behind, especially in this complex and volatile times of the VUCA world?
Well, if you have been in an ASEAN gatherings or ASEAN meetings, there is this feeling of togetherness. So that is something that I think we need to nurture and utilize. But I think in terms of encouraging the ASEAN countries to work together, basically the way I see it, everyone has something to offer. There will be countries that will have more experience in terms of responding to volcanic eruption, like the Philippines, Indonesia with regard to earthquake and tsunami, and then
You
the
have
Mekong
everything.
but the Mekong countries with regard to the floods and droughts, right? So there are always things to share, and the world out there is when it comes to disaster, supermarket of disaster, we need as many stars to enlighten the sky, and having the 10 countries together and sharing the different areas of expertise and skills, I think will make us stronger. That's one. And then second is a reality that when it comes to natural disaster, there is this surplus of resilience that I've mentioned. And then that is also where we can share our experience and expertise. What I have learned in the past 2 decades, ASEAN, being in ASEAN community and being an Indonesian, we get smarter when we share our knowledge and experience. And we don't actually, put them to ourselves, right? And I think we have to do that. We have to nurture that not only within ourselves but also collectively. We share it with the others. So I think this is also the kind of feeling that we want to instill. We're currently developing a new cycle of the ATMA work program, and we really want to expedite this vision to become the global leader. And Indonesia cannot do it alone. Philippines cannot do it alone. Together, Indonesia and Philippines are strong because we are the 7-Eleven and supermarket of disasters. But if all the 10 countries are together, to achieve this vision of the global leader, one can support in terms of the ICT like Singapore, right? Or Thailand in terms of the stockpile or logistic. I think that we will get there. We will achieve that vision.
Oh, wow. That's very well said, Lina. So, ASEAN as one, or one ASEAN is what we say, right? One ASEAN. And I think you have become very poetic lately. I like your metaphor of, using the stars to lighten up the dark sky as a collective. So you get more light as a result. So that's a very good, way of saying that, uh, working together is very much important in governing risk and reducing each other's vulnerability to disaster risk. So at this point, may I pull in our master of ceremonies, Colin, because Colin is also not only our exemplary student at AIM in EMDRCM, but is also the assistant provincial administrator of Batangas province, where Taal volcano is situated. So maybe, Colin, would you like to say, briefly share your experience in disaster risk governance in your province of Batangas?
Okay, so I think uh, I'm very fortunate to be part of the AIM Executive Masters in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management. At the same time, being the Assistant Provincial Administrator of Batangas, because we are very hands-on with regards to governance because we're in local government, and was kind of thrown into this. I was appointed Assistant Administrator in around July 2019. And then when I first came in, we had a swine flu outbreak. And then a few months later, the Taal volcano erupted out of nowhere. So I'm very fortunate, I think, to have AIM EMDRCM by my side. And in our EMDRCM Master's Program, we are developed to do three things: lead, inspire, and transform, which is synonymous to the mission of AIM. So that's lead, inspire, transform. So I'll expound to it a little bit. So lead, we are trained to be collaborative, adaptive, and take into consideration science and data and perspectives of other stakeholders in decision making. This was very important during the Taal volcano eruption because we had to take into account data from the Philippine Institute of Volcanology. We have to take into account data from the Department of Health. We have to do response on our 200 evacuation centers at the time. So we need to lead differently. Number two is inspire, because we are trained to communicate our knowledge, ideas, and stories to others. Disaster language is quite complex if you're not really into it, if you're not really studying a master's in it. It's very complex, and everybody knows this. Climate change, hydrometeorological hazards, etc. So for example, our job is to contextualize it according to the audience and to the recipients. And finally, transform. So in our class, in AIM EMDRCM, we do systems thinking and design thinking. And this helps us and these tools help us with critical thinking. We are able to dissect issues and look beyond the surface, because great disaster risk governance, I think, is about looking beyond the surface, looking underneath. If you think of an iceberg, the iceberg model, the management tool that's taught to us. For example, in COVID-19 and Taal volcano, we are trained, and I was able to pick up different perspectives of the same disaster event. So I think disaster risk governance is about unearthing the root causes, and that's what the EMDRCM is helping me as I perform my duties as Assistant Provincial Administrator. So I think that's all I have to say on that matter. So thank you for asking, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you for saying that I'm a good student. I hope I
am. Okay. Thank you very much, Colin. You know what? You actually left a very good message for all of us, because I think the common core that we have heard throughout the presentations of our wonderful speakers this afternoon is leadership and inspiring and transforming. So Adelina mentioned, for example, transformers, being transformers, in to not just incrementally change, but to effect transformational change or transformative change. And this was also echoed by Bernadia, which heads the UCLG aspect as an enabler or a force multiplier for the local governments and the city governments, and also what Hotel Resilient is doing through the work of Bijan, that the private sector is actually taking the lead, and becoming champions for stronger and more effective risk governance, not only for their sector but also for the for the whole society as well, making them as a model for all the different sectors that need to collaborate together. So, as a closing question for all of our speakers, I think all the presentations bring to the fore the importance of leadership. And AIM, as Colin mentioned, it's the rallying cry is lead, inspire, and transform. So the importance of leadership in disaster risk governance. And so I would like to close the panel discussion with this question to our three speakers. What leadership qualities do you think disaster risk and crisis managers should have to be effective in these VUCA times? So give us three leadership skills or qualities that you have, that you find most useful in disaster risk governance, in managing shocks and risks. Let's start with Lena.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought it's an easy question, but apparently it's quite difficult because you asked based on my experience and based on the qualities that I have. But perhaps I can respond to you based on our experience as an organization, as AHA Center.
Okay.
Because we have been actually going through some kind of rethinking, right? And leading to some kind of a transformation because of all the expectation and the situation. So three things, based on our experience again. One, how to say it in English? Agile, being, agility. This means that we need to be flexible and be able to adapt to things rapidly and think, quickly. And because things are changing rapidly, so we need to be agile. That's number one. Second, clarity. Clarity in terms of, knowing what actually our core expertise is and what we want and what is important, because we cannot do many things, right? So really what we can offer with our best assets and what we can contribute, and then see how we can actually create multiplier effects through the platforms that we have. So the clarity. And that also relates to risk, being aware of who we are, right? Again, because we cannot do everything. Number three, confidence in leading through uncertainty. And that is not easy. But as a disaster manager, we're often, faced with that situation. And we sometimes there are no answers to the situation. Last year when we celebrated our 8-year anniversary, compared to last year and then this year, I think right now we are clearer in terms of how we manage, the other types of risks and how AHA Center would contribute to disasters in other settings. I think we are clearer, but last year we were not. But sometimes we have just to give it time, to reflect and pause and go through that while continue to lead and be persistent in terms of doing something good. So ability to lead in terms of uncertainty, but at the same time be confident about it without no hesitation, just like when samurai. Anyway, so that's those three.
Okay, thank you very good answers. So that's agility, clarity, and confidence, in all through this difficult times in a VUCA world. Thank you, Adelina. So may I go to Bernadia? Bernadia?
I will be very short because of the time. And the leaders should walk our talks, I think the leaders should really give a good example and do instead of just talking. And I think this by having walk our talk leaders, then the leaders can be trusted. I think this is important key to also see the benefit of the leadership. And the second, leaders should also listen to people. And have the ability to also analyze what people want. And I think this responsiveness is very important in this situation, so that they can act faster and faster but right, not just do things but they don't really measure the risks and impacts. I think there's good quality leaders I see, and I also want that we have more women leaders in this area, because I think looking at Indonesia, for example, 10% of the more than 400 local governments have women leaders, and this is very few compared to the number of local governments here. So, but in the Philippines, you have more. I think we need to work more for 50-50. Women leaders.
Okay.
Back to you.
Thank you very much, Bernadia. I think all those qualities of the leaders you mentioned, being trustworthy and walking the talk and all these things, we need these leaders all the time, not just through tough times, especially here in the Philippines. So, but that is another story. So let's move on to Bijan. Bijan,
Yes, I think I can be short because Adelina and Bernadette already, it's worse to play this game as the third position because all the good ones are gone now. No, I will answer the question in terms of hotel managers or owners that I met. And I think the ones that really impressed me were the ones that said, when I go to bed, I think about how to deal with the next storm that's going to come, and it's on their mind. So they're forward thinking. They think about these scenarios, and they don't just think about business as usual. And there's another notion here. We often talk about leadership, but I came across this concept of laddership some time ago, where you essentially, instead of being out front and having people follow you, you hold a ladder for others to climb and go up. And I think those are really the best kind of leaders that provide the opportunity for their team, for others to become leaders, and through example that they set for others. And that applies to any field, I think.
All right. I think I don't have to say anything else or add anything else to that. So with that note, I would like to finish the webinar proper, the panel discussion, and thank again our very distinguished speakers, Adelina, Bernadia, and Bijan. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge and everything. So I would like to ask all our, participants inside the Zoom room to go on cam and please give our speakers a big round of applause. There you are. Yeah, most of them are our students in the EMDRCM program. And yes, so thank you all for your participation as well. So I'm move to or give the floor again to Colin for the takeaways and the closing remarks.
Thank you, Professor Marquesa. Once again, thank you to our speakers, Ms. Adelina, Dr. Bernadia, and Dr. Bijan, and of course, to our moderator, Professor Marquesa. I just want to add to the panel discussion and mention the importance of empathy in leadership. Active leadership is very important, and because disaster resilience is so confusing with all types of data and jargon. But great leaders find a way to combine complexities of information and frameworks and protocols and what the community is telling them. So anyway, I just want to finish by sharing 3 key takeaways. Takeaway number 1, our next door neighbors can help us best. We should build resilience together as one ASEAN region. By year 2025, ASEAN has to become the global leader in resilience because, well, let's face it, of our experience in disasters and our experiences in responding to them. Ms. Adelina and AHA Center has given us so many tools to promote risk governance at a country level. Today, she introduces to concepts such as surplus of resilience and evidence-based disaster preparedness. We learn best from our experience, and we as ASEAN should collaborate and work together because the hazards are not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, they will be stronger through time. So takeaway number 2, there is no straight line approach to disaster response. There are crises that are very complex in nature. For example, COVID-19. By definition, it is a health crisis. However, solving it only with healthcare interventions won't be enough. Dr. Bernadia told us that we should look into initiatives on food resilience, digital commerce, economic stimulus package, community engagement, and data synchronization. This would require working with all sectors in the local and national government. For example, just a personal experience, in our EMDRCM Master's Program, we are being developed to have a multifaceted approach to disaster risk management in our classes. As a matter of fact, I just had breakfast with the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Secretary William Dar, this morning to talk about our joint Batangas Provincial Food Security Program. Because COVID-19 in order for us to solve COVID-19, we have to provide basic needs for our people so they don't go out, I'm sure our current and future students will appreciate this in the EMDRCM program. And finally, my third key takeaway is we need to develop industry standards on resilience. Mr. Bijan showed us a cartoon earlier on a multi-layered disaster. The small wave is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is immediate, but sooner, or hopefully not later. Oh, it's the other way around. But anyway, the economic recession will cripple our livelihood. And then the bigger wave comes in, which is climate change, which would reinforce our hazards. A great way to look at disaster risk governance is to look beyond the issues at hand. In our EMDRCM class, we use numerous management tools such as the problem tree analysis and the SAPA-DAPA framework, both of which I used last night because we had a deadline on the feasibility study, but which I'm sure our current and future students would be able to appreciate and use right away at work. So global industry standards of resilience should be established, much like with the tool introduced to us by Mr. Bijan today, and hotel resilience, which is divided into building structures, support systems, and effective management and crisis communication. E-learning can also unlock new opportunities in global industry capacity building. So those are my three key takeaways. I just want to throw it to the audience watching us today. So what about you guys watching at home in the office? So wherever you may be, viewers via Zoom or Facebook, what are your key takeaways? Let's take a moment to read some of your insights in the chat box or in the comment section. I think we have two right here. Okay. The first one is from Kay Caballero. Okay, so she said, very interesting discussion with a wide range of areas from an ASEAN perspective, dealing with various types of hazards to focusing local government units' multi-stakeholder approach in promoting innovative solutions in handling the pandemic. And of course, she also appreciated the new topic on hotel resiliency. Even I didn't know that at first. Just really nice. And has provided a new perspective in resiliency. So thank you for the knowledge sharing. I saw another one also from Zoom. This is from Shanmuga Retnam. Thank you, Mr. Kazai. The hospitality industry is now faced with more than disaster resilience and more of staying relevant and surviving the current tourism shock. It is a business risk which requires both local governance and hotel owners to reconceive. So thank you to our responders. So for everybody else, please continue in the chat and in the comments, or you can email us at zsdm@aim.edu for your thoughts, and also to get more information on the third cohort of the Executive Masters in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management.
Okay. Colin, there are some statistics that Paul has shared.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. Thank you, everyone. This is the message from Paul, one of our guys. Our Facebook live stream has reached 5,223, and the peak viewership at 124, and the engagement, like, shares, comments, reach at 880. So once again, I'm telling you, we have a global audience today, and I really appreciate that despite busy schedules, different time zones, different situations, of course, making with the COVID-19 making it harder. From the bottom of our hearts, we would like to thank you so much for taking part in today's session.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Prof. Marquesa. Again, email us at dsdm@aim.edu to learn more about how the EMDRCM program can help you become the crisis leader that you should be in these challenging times and moving forward. Also, know more about our admissions process and our options for funding and scholarships. So once again, thank you, everyone. Be safe always. See you soon at the Asian Institute of Management. And always remember, lead, inspire, transform. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much again, Bernadia, Adelina, and Bijan. So I hope to see you again, everyone. And take care, stay safe, and keep well. And good evening to everyone, at least here in the Philippines. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. We'll keep in touch for Nadia, Delina, and Vijan. Okay? Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.